Hey everyone! This video is all about discussing and using strategies that I have come up with for building small-scale spaceships in Minecraft. One thing to note is that these are my strategies, and that they may not work for everyone. So if they don't work for you, don't force yourself to conform to them. This video is only intended as a prompt to help you figure out your own strategies, and build some cool spaceships with your own power. Now, those of you subscribed to me might notice that this video has a twin, which was uploaded at the same time. That video is a showcase of spacecraft designs that I have constructed using the strategies I will discuss in this video. You can watch that video before or after this one, or not at all. That part is up to you. I'm going to structure this video in 5 parts, each representing a different stage of the building process. And then, at the end, I will go over some less specific strategies that I find handy overall. Now, we are going to be building a spaceship for the purposes of this video, and you are perfectly welcome to follow along block for block. However, if you do choose to build along with this video, I recommend that you try and think up some of your own designs and make your spaceship unique. Then you can decide for yourself whether or not these strategies truly work for you, and what you might do differently. Anyways, enough babbling from me. I'm sure you're pretty tired of it by now. And let's get into the first step of this process, which is finding ourselves a shape. Yep, that's right. The first step I always take when building a ship is to start with a simple shape. That shape can be anything. It could be, a cube, it could be a sphere, a ring, some spikes maybe, or even a simple wing, or maybe even a banana if you're feeling courageous enough. I usually am not, but that doesn't make it impossible. Now, the reason I start with a shape is because you have to start somewhere, and usually a shape will help generate ideas for what the ship can be, such as this little wing shape here. I've already got an idea blossoming in my head for what I think the purpose of this ship will be, and that will help me construct it later on. Hi, Kian from the future here, interrupting myself because I thought it would be important to show some other examples of shapes I could have used instead of this little wing here. This, by no means, is an all-encompassing group of shapes. There are so many more that you could use. I just thought it would be nice to kind of show what possibilities there could be. Calling it a wing does not necessarily mean it has to be a wing either. I mean, I could see how this could be made into some sort of cockpit as well. However, I'm going to stick with the wing narrative for now, and we'll see how that goes when we lead on to step number 2, which is to decide the purpose of your spaceship. Now, your spaceship doesn't really have to have a super well-defined purpose, but I think having a general idea of what it is used for is always a good plan. It'll help you figure out kind of how you want the spaceship to look. If, for example, you want to make this intimidating war cruiser, then you're probably going to want to go with a darker, more grimy color palette, as opposed to something more sporty or luxury-like, where it's probably going to be whitewashed and clean. Now, the reason that I choose the purpose of the ship after I've figured out a general shape is because usually the shape inspires me to think of a purpose on its own. For instance, in this case, this little shape here makes me think of something sporty like a sports car with fancy little curves and very, very subtle lines. So I think I'm going to pursue that. I think it's important to note in this case that steps 1 and 2 are definitely interchangeable. This particular order is only here because it's the order that I do most often. However, they're easily switched, and nothing is really lost in doing so. Step number 3 is where you start to build in the ship structure. Now, this step is probably going to be the most time-consuming out of all of them, and that makes sense, because you're basically going from that to this. And that's a pretty big jump, if you ask me. If you break it down, though, it can turn into something a lot more manageable. At its core, it is all about trial and error. It might take you a few tries and different approaches to the shape and purpose you established in steps 1 and 2 before you are satisfied. And I encourage you to still make several iterations of your design once you make one you are happy with. Remember, this step focuses purely on shape, so don't worry too much about the block you're using. And I also think it's important to note that if it isn't working out for you, you can always try a different shape or idea. There's no harm in restarting, and some of my favorite ship designs have actually resulted from just that. What I feel is most important about this step is that it incorporates what you figured out in step number 2 and the building pieces you figured out in step 1, and puts them all together into form. If you remember my step 2, I decided I wanted to build a sporty ship. So I kept that in mind, and you'll notice this ship doesn't have any guns, and it's got a pretty small cockpit to ship ratio, which sort of indicates in my mind that it has lots of thrust, lots of power. It can go quite quickly on its own. Moving on to step 4, this is where we now get to go into the fun stuff and choose the blocks we want to use for the final iteration of the ship. That is a mouthful. And here's what I've done with this model here. You can see I've tried to add a little bit of color with the warped hyphae, I think that's how you pronounce it, and added, of course, quartz on the wings to give it a nice, sleek, fancy look. And of course, you don't have to make just one ship design. In fact, I've made several. Now you can see I've also tweaked the structure on some of them a little bit, and I encourage you to do the same. Never try to box yourself in with one particular design once you've decided it. It's always up in the air, no matter what step you're on. And this, I think, is a substantial case for that. For example, my personal preference is this, and then closely followed by this one over here. However, if you were not me, you might like this one better, or perhaps even that one. And this step, like the previous step, and all the other steps for that matter, is a process of trial and error, and you're going to get it wrong at first, most likely, and probably the second time, maybe the third time. I get it wrong all the time too. You won't believe how many iterations I went through to get these 6. So don't be worried if it doesn't turn out the first time. It's always try again, and you'll learn as you go, and you'll get better and better, and pretty soon you'll be able to make fancy ships with ease. Anyways, I hope that gets you excited, because we're now on the final step of this process. The final step, like most final steps of things are, is a pass over all the things that you've done previously to make sure everything is in line and you're happy with what the outcome is. This step, while indeed final, can still bring change to almost everything in your build. And to demonstrate that point, I have done just that. Now, if it were up to me, I'm not sure which model I would choose. I like them both. They both have their qualities and both have their weaknesses. However, some might prefer this one, some might prefer that one. And I now realize that those of you following along block for block are probably pretty ticked off at me right now, so I'm sorry. In reality, though, any of these 3 vessels can be considered a final design, and whichever one you pick is really up to you. I mean, I like aspects of that one that I don't like as much in this one, and vice versa. And this one here is a little weird experiment I did just to see what it would look like with darker colors. That's all really subjective, and I encourage you to build multiple designs at each step, like I encouraged earlier. And thus we can conclude these 5 steps complete. Ta-da! We are done. Let's review. So in step 1, we chose a shape. Here I built a bunch of shapes and ended up choosing this wing structure here. In step 2, we brainstormed about what the shape could represent. Could it represent a sporty spaceship, or perhaps a cargo hauler, or maybe a war machine? In step number 3, we established a structure for that theme and shape, and put them together into one unit. In step number 4, we decided what blocks to use and where in the shape we established in the previous step. And finally, in step number 5, we reviewed all 4 of our previous steps and made changes according to how we liked them. We could rebuild the entire ship, start over, or continue on with the ship we had in step 4. Either ship from step 4 or 5 could be used as a final design. Alright, I hope that made sense. If it doesn't, and you have a question, let me know in the comments and I'll try my best to answer it coherently. But for now, let's move on a little bit to some general tips. Starting off with lighting, everyone's favorite chore. Except it doesn't have to be a chore in Minecraft. Lighting, in fact, when done well, can be the difference between an okay build and a fantastic build. And lighting is especially important to spacecraft because, I mean, we're in space. It's not exactly light out. If we don't have any lighting, things are just going to be dark and we won't be able to see much, and that's no fun. So make sure you light up your builds. It is an often underlooked step and difficult to master. However, if you get the basics right, your build can become a whole lot better. Next up, try to be as deliberate as you possibly can. In space, there isn't much randomness, and you don't get the random textures you see in rustic builds very often. So I try to remind myself whenever I build a spaceship to always be deliberate. Give everything some kind of purpose. It doesn't have to be realistic, it doesn't even have to be fancy. It just has to be there so you can explain to anyone looking at your build what it is. And it doesn't even have to have a good explanation either. Mine certainly don't. I mean, these wings could be for atmospheric stability, or maybe they could hold extra battery charges, or perhaps are solar panels and get charged up by the sun. Now, there are exceptions to this rule, if you can even call it a rule, which it is not. Of course, in giant space monsters, or perhaps asteroids or something, but for this sort of spaceship, it is a useful tool to follow, and I highly recommend it. Thirdly, make sure your materials match with one another. For example, a spaceship that specializes mostly in war, or perhaps cargo haulage, might use materials like in this column here. A spaceship that is more luxury-oriented or sports-like, or perhaps is a brand spanking new starfighter, might use this sort of palette here. Obviously, I encourage you to use whatever blocks you like. However, some blocks work better with others than, for example, this basalt and this quartz pillar here. However, they can still work in some situations, and I encourage you to explore. However, keep in mind that some materials work better in some themes than others. Actually, now that I think of it, it might be easier to represent by having these two columns separate. There you go. Hopefully that makes my point clear. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, don't be afraid to start over. Starting over is all part of the process of learning, and you can only learn if you give yourself enough room to learn. If you try to build a spaceship and you don't like it and you get discouraged and never build a spaceship again, you haven't learned very much. So please, keep trying. Even if it doesn't work out the first time, second time, third time, fourth time, etc., you'll get it eventually, and practice makes perfect. And pretty soon you'll be building better spaceships than me, I guarantee. And that's it. Tutorial over. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know down in the comment section, and I'll do my best to respond. Feedback is always appreciated on these sorts of things. Anyways, thank you for watching, and take care.